So good. Hey guys, it is good to see you today. We start every week by welcoming our different campuses. And those of you who watch us online, we welcome you. We appreciate you taking the time to engage with us. For those listening online, we appreciate you. And for all those in the room with me, I love you. Extra energy today, which is a good thing because we are wrapping up a 3-week series that we are simply calling Future Church. And the purpose of this series has been pretty simple. We're just going to pause. That's what we've been doing. We pause. We take time to look back and reflect on some of the things we've gone through as a church, some of the things that have shaped us and formed us. And then we've taken time to just kind of reflect on where we're currently at, why we started as a church, and why we exist. And then some of this series is looking forward. In fact, a lot of today specifically is about looking forward and considering the future of the church. Right? Because when a church first starts, it's exciting and it's new and it's fun. And then over time, the excitement starts to fade. And I was looking at different products that I have in my home that at one point were exciting products. Some of you will remember this, the tape cassette player, right? You might even have one of those around, a VHS tape. And does anybody still own a VHS player? Come on, even at our different campuses, let's be raising our hand. Wow, I didn't realize that there were that many of you. Now, here's the real question. How many of you own a Super 8 player? I literally had these tapes, about 20 of these at my house. And recently, because my wife from her parents had given them to us just to store. And so I called my parents and said, hey, do you still have that Super 8 player sitting around there? No, we got rid of that. But Super 8 tapes, right? What else do I have here? The original iPod. Oh, yeah, baby. And I'm keeping a close eye on this because I don't want someone stealing it and putting it on eBay. But you understand that when products first come out, they're exciting, they're new. It's just like businesses, right? You have Pan American Airlines and Blockbuster Video, and then there was Borders Bookstore. Anybody remember the Woolworth 5 and dime stores? So at one point, these products or these companies, they're relevant and they're necessary, but then over time, they fade away. Well, I'm guessing you know this, but there have been a lot of articles over the past couple of years, a lot of podcasts, a lot of different people speaking and saying things that allude to the fact that the church is fading away and the church is slowly dying. I said this in week 1, but I'm going to say it again. Do not be mistaken. The future of the church is certain. Okay, the church is not going out of business. The church is never going to be shut down. Regardless of the faith deconstruction stories that you may hear, regardless of the articles that you may come across, maybe statistics that you see, I want you to know the church is not losing its relevance. It's not dying, and quite honestly, it's not even in trouble. And I say that with confidence because I could give you plenty of examples around the world of how God is at work and God is moving. In fact, right now, do you know where the Church of Jesus Christ is growing fastest, more than any other country in the world? Iran. Now think about that. God is right now actively working in a country with very few church buildings, lots and lots of persecution, terrible pollution, limited water supplies, incredible amounts of poverty. And God is at work. That is not slowing him down. That is not stopping him. And after Iran, do you want to know which country is the second fastest growing, the church is growing the second fastest in? Afghanistan. Now think about this. No public church buildings in all of Afghanistan. No Christian schools. Incredible amounts of opposition. I mean, how is that even possible? Well, it's possible because 2,000 years ago, Jesus made a promise. What did he say? He said, I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And so if I was a reporter today, I would simply stand up here and report to you that in 2,000 years, nothing has ever been able to stop the Jesus movement from advancing and moving forward in our world. Now, admittedly, it doesn't always feel like that. Right? There are times where it feels like God is silent. There are times it feels like God is a million miles away. But one of the things that as you study Scripture, and one of the things as you just look throughout history about the Spirit of God is that the Spirit of God is like waves of the ocean. There are moments when the tide comes in, and there are moments when the tide goes out. But it doesn't mean the water's gone. It just means there are moments where we sense God more than others. There are moments that we feel God more than others. And regardless of what we sense or feel, let's just be aware of the fact that God is always at work behind the scenes. And he's moving. And he's connecting dots even when we can't see it. And so the future of the church is certain. But what it looks like is changing. And that is okay. That's actually a really good thing because sometimes leadership structures within a church need to change. Sometimes the focus of a specific church or the church at large needs to change. Sometimes a church needs to start doing things or they need to stop doing things. Sometimes the model of a specific church or the church at large and how we do church needs to evolve and change. Structures need to change. If you were to go back to the 1600s, many of the followers of Jesus living in the colonies were Puritans. And they're called Puritans because they really wanted the Christian faith to be as pure and as simple as possible. And there was kind of this opposition in their hearts to the Catholic Church with lots of rituals and liturgies and elaborate buildings. So they just wanted to get back to the simplicity of faith. But man, when you study the Puritans, here are people who love God, and yet they're in a constant state of spiritual anxiety, always trying to search for signs of God's favor or his anger. They never knew, are we in or are we out? And yet they were this strong force for Jesus in the early days of America. And out of their desire for simplicity, they met in what was called meeting houses. And when you look at their buildings and you specifically look in the inside of their buildings, you just see how simple it is. They're beautiful, but they rarely had anything hanging on the walls. Musical instruments were forbidden because they didn't want anything to distract from God, and so they sang songs a cappella, which in my opinion would be a real distraction from God, right? The talks that were given, the sermons and the messages were regularly over 2, sometimes 3 hours long. And if you fell asleep, you were punished in some way. You were actually fined. Church members were assigned seats based on their wealth, their position in the community, their age, their gender, and other factors. It is a good thing that the church evolves, right? It's a good thing that the church changes with culture. 2,600 years ago, the Jewish people were in a very dark season as a nation. The nation of Israel was just in this horrible place because so many of the Jewish people had been exiled to Babylon, which was 900 miles away, right? Several months' journey for them. And as they're in exile, wanting to go back to Jerusalem, many of them had given up hope. Many of them are just looking around at their circumstances and just feeling like, hey, we're never going to move forward. We've lost so much of what we valued and what was important to us. And so God decides to speak to the Jewish people through the prophet Isaiah, and he reminds them of what he's done for them throughout their history. He said, hey, you might feel defeated. You might feel like I've given up. You might feel like I've abandoned you. You might feel like things are fading away. But I want you to know, if you look at the history of your nation, I have been with you all along. Here's what I've done. Here's what I've done. Here's what I've done. And after this list of what God has done throughout their history, here's what he says to the Jewish people. He says, it is nothing compared to what I am going to do, for I am about to do something new. Our God is at work. He's always at work. He never stops. He never stops working. He is constantly building his church, which is why the church is always going to be evolving and changing. And so as we look to the future of Great Lakes Church, yes, also to the church around the world, but as we look to the future of Great Lakes Church, we want to be ready for what God's going to do. We want to be ready for how he's going to use our faith community. And one of the things that we can do to prepare for the future is to reflect on what God has already done. I just alluded to that, right? When we reflect on what God's done, it builds our faith. It gives us confidence in what he is able to do. And so for the last couple of weeks, and we do this regularly throughout the year, we take time just to pause and reflect on what God's done in the past. And if you're new to Great Lakes Church, back in the fall of 2008, there were a handful of family and friends that got together and they just started to dream about a new church in Southeast Wisconsin. And as the church started to form, and we launched officially in February of 2009, but as the church started to form and get off the ground, I got to tell you, we had nothing but a dream in front of us. We had no buildings, we had no land, we had very few people showing up. There was no office space. Matter of fact, the first office, which was for a couple of years, was my bedroom. So when people would say to me in the first couple of years, hey, Dave, I'd like to meet you at your office, I'd be like, nope, not going to happen. We can meet at Starbucks. right? We can meet somewhere else, but it was my office. And here we are almost 13 years later. More than 900 people have been baptized. Our staff and our volunteers over the years have invested into a few thousand children and students through our different ministries and events. We've given away hundreds of thousands of dollars to mission work outside of the mission work we do every week at Great Lakes Church. We've created scores of partnerships with ministries locally and internationally in different parts of the world. We now own property, right? We own property in Kenosha. We lease a building in Kenosha. We own property in a beautiful facility in Racine. Every single year since we started, we have ended in the black. There's never been a single year where we've ended in the red. And it's important for us to remind ourselves of these things. Because when we look at how God has worked in and through us in our history, it gives us confidence of what he is able to do in the future. And God would say to us today, I am about to do a new thing. Another way we prepare for the future is by recognizing what God is currently doing. So if you're a surfer, you realize you have zero ability to create waves. You go out in the ocean and you can run around as fast as you can, but you're not going to create waves. All you can do is see the waves and try to catch the waves. And that's true of life. God's the one who creates waves. It's up to us to identify those waves and to do our best to ride them. One of the biggest waves that is happening right now in our world is the incredible amounts of opportunity for ministry in the digital world, online. It's actually one of the key factors on why the church in Iran is growing at the pace it's growing and why different parts of the world it's exploding. I don't know if you realize this. We have more adults who are a part of the Great Lakes Church community and watch online every week than we actually have show up in person. And so we've just decided it a couple years ago, and we just continue to get more and more intense about it. We are going to continue to put more and more staff and resources into digital ministry. We're working like crazy on ways to better serve and resource and connect with those who engage with us online. There are people, and this is just fascinating to me, because some people will argue and say, well, online church isn't legit church, not real church. Well, here's what I can tell you. There are people who watch online and they volunteer with us. They serve at our church and the cleaning team and in different ministries. They serve in our church and they've never been to an in-person service. We had people this past summer who showed up to Saturday serves who've never been to an in-person service. We have people who give regularly to help fuel this mission. They've never been to an in-person service. Every single week this past summer, every single week, on average, I had a minimum of one, sometimes 2 or 3 people who, when I'd be at a restaurant or somewhere out and about, and they would see me, they'd walk up to me and say, hey, Dave, I attend Great Lakes Church. And I look at them, I'm like, how come I've never seen you? I just kind of give them a hard time. And they say, man, I watch online faithfully. And no joke, a lot of times I'd say, what did I speak about last week? I'd just give them a quick test. Most of the time they pass, man. And I just want to say, for those of you who watch on video week after week, for those of you who engage with us on podcasts and you listen faithfully, man, we value you. You're as much a part of this community as anyone else. And if you've not let us yet know that you're part of the online crew, I want you to go to greatlakeschurch.com/online crew. I'm talking, this is those of you who you rarely or almost never show up in person, but you're part of our online crew. Just let us know. We can pray for you. It gives us an opportunity to resource you from time to time, and we want to include you in what we're doing. Guys, our goal is not to get everybody to show up to in-person services. I actually had someone, haven't been around since the pandemic. They said to me, we were having breakfast. They said, now, Dave, I know that your goal is to get me back in person, so you're going to see me. I said, my goal is not to get you in person. I already see you enough. I don't want to look at this anymore. No, I said, I'd love to see you in person, but here's the reality. I have one goal, and that is to do my best as a pastor, but then as our church links arms, that we do our best to help you follow Jesus. That we help you, regardless of whether you're engaged with us digitally or in person, that we help you take steps forward in obedience to Jesus. So we're just going to keep putting more and more resources in there. Another wave, a second wave that's happening right now is an opportunity in just the research we've done with children and students. And the opportunity is to be a voice of hope and positivity. Because I think we all know this. There's a growing crisis of mental health and anxiety among children and students right now. And I think so much of it stems from all the mixed messages they get with body image and sexuality and whether or not, you can do something and what you have to do to be accepted and what success looks like. And so we are as committed as we've ever been to put more and more resources into our children and student programs. It's going to be a big part of our Christmas offering this year. At our Racine campus, some of you know that back earlier this year, we had our roof collapse in a third of the building. And so a third of our building's been shut down. It happens to be in our children's area. Thankfully, nobody was in the building, when that happened. But here's the deal. As we rebuild, we've decided we're putting tens of thousands of dollars, not from insurance, right? Insurance is kind of exhausted. It's been like a couple $1 million deal here. But tens of thousands of dollars in the rebuild and redoing the entryway and creating welcoming spaces for our children. And in Kenosha, we're going to continue to do the same. We're going to continue to invest because we have an opportunity to teach our children and our students that their identity can be found in Jesus. And we're going to work as hard as ever to put an anchor in the hearts of our children and youth so they do not drift too far in life. A third wave that's happening right now in our world is a wave of information. We have access to information like never before. The problem is trying to make sense of that information. The problem is trying to figure out what's good information and what's bad information. And where this has really gripped the hearts of our leadership teams at Great Lakes Church is we started to realize maybe 6 months ago that when someone surrenders their life to Jesus and they use their connection card and said, I'm becoming a follower of Jesus, which we've had so many people do this year, we realize that we don't really have many resources to point them to. Like we'll send them an email, we'll encourage them, and hey, we're going to be praying for you, and we do pray for them. And so we started just saying, what can we do? And one of the ideas that came out of that, our sessions, was like, we should create a box that when someone gives their life to Jesus, we say, hey, you can swing by the next steps table, and we've got a box of resources. And so let me just show you, as this has been developing, phase one. When someone gives their life to Jesus, we have a box that we're going to give them, and then they'll go and they'll grab it, and we've got books in here, we've got a Bible in here, we've got candy in here, right? We've got all sorts. I know lots of people. I'm giving my life to Jesus this week. I want those M&Ms, right? And then on top of this, because we realize so much is done online, the books that we're offering, we're looking at ways to say, how can we offer them digitally? Not just through Kindle type stuff, but audio, because there's a lot of you never going to read, right? How do we continue to get better and better and better at resourcing people? Right? When someone wants to take a next step in following Jesus, we want our next steps table to be completely ready and resourced. And just one of the core things of our church is we want to give stuff away. We don't want to charge for stuff. Listen, people, they use their phone, 5-6 hours a day on average. And when they go to places like YouTube, they're not just going there to be entertained. A lot of times they go there to figure out how to solve problems and learn new things. And so we're saying, man, one of the biggest crises that couples go through is couple problems, relationship problems, marriage problems. So how do we get better at resourcing people in their marriage? How do we help people follow Jesus in practical ways? And I want you to know that in the next year, in the next 12 months, we are going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on resources and videos in learning how to do a better job digitally with connecting with people and making sense of information so they can be helped in their journey of following Jesus. And the reason why is because our goal isn't to get everybody to show up in person, listen to me give a talk, listen to our music teams sing their songs and lead us in music, and then we leave out of here, and then we just hope for next week to come around so we can get our little spiritual boost again. Our goal is to equip and empower you to bring the hope of Jesus everywhere you go. When you go home to your family, when you go into your places of work, when you just connect with people, friends, and you're hanging out with people, that you're bringing the hope of Jesus. We want to equip and empower you to see the value in people the way God sees in them. And then we want to equip and empower you to add value to people everywhere you go. Do you realize Great Lakes Church, with our buildings, and we've got a nice big building in Racine and Kenosha, we've got 2 auditoriums, and we can hold a lot of people. But I'm telling you, the impact that we can have if you feel equipped and empowered and confident is exponential. With the amount of people who show up, with the amount of people who watch online, I'm telling you, if all of us just took our network of family and friends, and we just felt equipped and empowered on a regular basis to bring hope, to see value, to add value, I'm telling you, it's exponential. It's 10, 15, 20,000 people we're connected with on a regular basis. It's not about what happens in the room. In fact, I have a friend that I hang out with at least on a weekly basis, and he said to me one day, he said, Dave, I don't go to church, and I'm going to tell you why, blah, 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 blah. He said, I'm not part of a church. I looked at him and said, you're wrong. You are. He said, no, I'm not. I said, dude, you're part of Great Lakes Church. He said, well, I said, hold on. In the last year, you've showed up 3 times in person. I said, every single week, I'm at your house at least one time, and every single week when I'm at your house, I give you a summary of the entire talk. I take 2-3 minutes, which the people of Great Lakes Church wish I could get it down to 2-3 minutes, but I do it for you. I said, I give you 2 to 3 minutes. I said, there are times that I actually pray for you, and there are times, if I remember correctly, that you've actually prayed for me because I said, I need some prayer right now. He's like, yeah, you got a point. I said, welcome to Great Lakes Church. You are a part of it. We have people who do not show up in person regularly, but they're a part of an ongoing group, and they watch the talks and they discuss them. So we prepare for the future by recognizing what God is currently doing. And I'm not going to be a guy who boos digital world. Now, believe me, I don't want to be speaking in empty rooms. I don't want our kids to walk in and have no volunteers in the rooms that they're going to be put into, right? But I'm telling you, we embrace this. And so we prepare by recognizing what God is currently doing. Another way we prepare for the future is by living with faith-filled expectancy. Let me ask you, what do you believe is possible for God to do in and through us as a faith community in the next year? What do you believe is possible for God to do in and through us collectively in the next 10 years? And whatever it is, do you believe that God is capable of doing more than we could ever ask or imagine? Earlier, I alluded to how the nation of Israel had gone through a very, very dark time. It lasted several decades. So many of the Jewish people living in Babylon, living in exile. And what happened towards the end of their time there, I mean, they'd been there for like 7 decades. What happened towards the end of the time in Babylon is they started to grow comfortable. Many of them actually started losing the desire to go back home. It's like, hey, this is where our family is. This is where our friends is. And so God, through the prophet Isaiah, decided he was going to speak life-giving words to them. And he was going to speak words of hope to them. And he said through Isaiah, he said, you need to go back home. You need to return to Jerusalem. And then here's what he says. He says, enlarge your house, build an addition, spread out your home, and spare no expense, for you will soon be bursting at the seams. In other words, the best is yet to come. The future is bright. And I want you to know that despite the pandemic, despite the Racine roof collapsing in 1/3 of the building, and it's still being closed off, and it will be closed off for several more months. Despite all the road construction around the Kenosha campus, and you got to feel like Lewis and Clark trying to find out how to get to where we're at, the best days of the church are still to come. And so I'm going to ask you to join me in believing that God will continue to do miracles. And I'm going to ask you to join me in believing that God is going to continue to heal people of different sicknesses and diseases. And I'm going to ask you to continue believing with me that God's going to use us to influence children and students. And that when they do veer off the path that we pray for them in life, that God is powerful enough to bring them back. And I'm going to ask you to continue believing with me that God can change hearts. That God can take people who bring chaos everywhere they go and turn them into a peacemaker. That God can take someone whose heart is a heart of stone and he can soften it. See, it's easy to look at the darkness and the polarization and the anger and all the things that are right in front of us and start to lose hope. But I want you to know God is always at work. He never stops. He never stops working. And we must not lose sight of the fact that the best is yet to come. God is building his church. So we prepare for it with faith-filled expectancy. Another way to prepare for the church future of what God is doing is by doing all that we can do right now. Everything in life is dependent on 2 factors, God factors and human factors. Right? So God determines certain things. God chooses our parents. He chooses our race, our talents. He chooses when we're born, where we're born. I mean, those things are absolutely out of our control. But what is in our control is what we do with the gifts God's given us. What we do and what is in our control is maximizing the opportunities that come our way. So just think of it this way. God creates trees, and it's up to us to envision what those trees become. So God creates the trees. It's up to us to envision furniture or tables or houses or chairs. All the different things that can be made from trees. And so in the context of our church, there's so much outside of our control, right? We don't get to choose who walks through our doors, obviously. Right? We don't get to choose that. We don't get to choose what facilities that we meet in. We don't get to choose how many resources we have. We don't get to choose the gifts and the talents of the individuals who become a part of the church. Only God determines those things. But there are a few things we do choose. And over the years, we have made many, many decisions that have ended up determining what our church looks like today. Very early on, one of the decisions we made was to embrace the words of James, who was a disciple of Jesus. And James, to give you quick context, had spoken these words after a long church business meeting. There's a lot of debate over customs and traditions and what should be expected of people who want to become followers of Jesus. And all the Jewish leaders seemed to be making it really difficult and really complicated. And so at the end of this meeting, James stands up and he says, hey, I've heard the debate and I've heard the arguing, and I've decided we should not make it difficult for those who are turning to God. And so from day one, we've made the choice to not make it difficult for people turning to God. We said, accuse us of being too easy, accuse us of being too simple, accuse us of whatever you want, but here's the deal. We are going to love people. We are going to serve people. We are going to welcome people. We are going to be open-armed. We are going to help people and meet them where they're at in their spiritual journey, just like God meets us. And so we've been building a culture. We talked about this last week with the 5 Gs. We said we are going to be a church of grace where we love everybody always. We're going to be a church that tries to connect people in groups. And in a group setting, it's going to be this work of building bridges, not walls. And then we're going to be a church where we're going to focus on owning our faith and growing. And we said we want to mature, not maintain where we're at. And then we said we want a church where people use their gifts to serve here, near, and far. And we want to be a church of generosity where we contribute more than we consume. That's why we give everything away. And over the years, I got to tell you, there's been a whole lot of people, they've shown up and they've loved it. And they said, we're on board and we're on mission. We want to link arms. And there's also been people that showed up and they looked around and said, not a fan. And that's okay. But here's an email that I received from someone years ago when we were still at Tinseltown. They sent me an email. They said, I didn't like the fact that there were only 2 songs sung at the beginning. I much prefer 4 or 5 songs. I also noticed that little to no people were actually singing with the music, which made me uncomfortable. When the sermon came on, Dave seemed phony baloney. I don't know him. I'm not judging him, but I didn't get a good impression of him. I don't think I will be attending again. My husband had even less kind words for your church, but I won't go into that. You know what I did when I got that email? I didn't respond. I just thought, not for everybody. But I will say this. We've done our best from day one to reflect the heart of Jesus. And the mission of Jesus was never to pamper a bunch of religious people. It was Jesus who said, healthy people don't need a doctor. He said, sick people do. He says, I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. And so over the past 12 or 13 years, we've made the choice to create a church that we refer to affectionately as a hospital for sinners, not a hotel for saints, a place of hope, healing, and forgiveness. And we have made choices that we believe have reflected the heart of God and what He's asking us to do. And He has blessed us way more than we have ever deserved. He's been so good to us. Not because we're better, not because we're more creative, not because we're more deserving than anyone else. I'm convinced it's because we've stayed on mission. Someone recently wrote this about the impact of the church. They said, Great Lakes Church was the first church I stepped into after being raised to believe that all churches were from Satan. It was against all odds that I would find Jesus, but God had other plans. After a series of events, I found myself open-minded enough to check out Great Lakes Church, and from the beginning, I was sold. I was all in. I have not looked back. I was baptized at Great Lakes, and here it is. I am several years later, and as I write this, I do not live in Wisconsin anymore, but I'm getting ready to go to church right now, the church that I now attend. I'm every bit in now as I was then, plus some. I've raised my kids to know Jesus, and I know that the ripple effect will continue. And I'm telling you, I could literally, no exaggeration, literally read hundreds of stories like this that I've received over the years. And it's a result of choices we made. We've looked at the trees that God's created, and we've asked ourselves, what can we do with that? How can we maximize what He's trusted us with? And as I just recently have gone through this again in my heart, like, God, what are the resources you give them? God, what are the things you've trusted us with? I can't get away from this reality. The greatest gift that God has trusted us with is you. And every season, it's people like you who've stepped up and said, I'm going to do whatever I can do right now. And so I just want you to know, every time you pray, you're helping prepare for our future. Because I believe God hears your prayers. When you pray for our church, I believe that. And it also prepares your heart. When you're praying for the church, it's doing something in your heart, and you're saying, I want this to succeed. I want it to move forward. Every time you give, you're helping prepare us for the future. Do you realize the reason we have chairs today is because there was a point where we did not have chairs, and there were people who gave to a vision. The reason we have online and digital ministry is because there was a point we did not have video cameras, and we did not have access to the digital world like we have today. And there were people who gave, and there are people who said, man, we're going to make a podcast possible. The reason we have land and buildings, the reason we have staff and resources is at some point we didn't have those things, but people looked out and they said, I'm going to give. I'm going to be a part of that. The decisions we make today will determine what the church looks like tomorrow. Every time that you serve, you're helping prepare us for the future. A couple months ago, my wife and I went to a restaurant looking forward to going. We get there, and it has a close sign on it. And then they have a note. It says, due to the pandemic and the shortage of workers, we've decided to close our business. We're moving fully to catering. It was a big disappointment. And what's crazy is that story is not isolated, right? I was talking to a restaurant owner 2 weeks ago. And I was actually there. I was eating at the restaurant. And I just said, how's things going? And they said, we can't get anybody to show up and work and serve. And in that day, they were concerned that the dishwasher may not even show up. I'm like, well, I better get my order for food in right now. I'm not going to chance this thing, right? It's just crazy. It's a problem all across our nation, right? And employers are just trying to give all kinds of incentives to get people to come and work. It's like, we'll pay you lots of money. We'll pay for your college. We'll show up to your home every morning and wake you up. We'll give you a bath. We'll hire you an Uber. Come on, let's make this thing happen. It's just fascinating. But contrast that with the Church of Jesus Christ, the largest movement of any kind in the history of the world. Right now, all across the globe, churches are open. And the reason they are open is because of an army of unpaid volunteers who've chosen to step up and serve. And so I'm just going to close today by asking you very candidly, will you step up and serve? Whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, you were created for a purpose. You are not an accident. The reason you're on this planet is not simply to use up oxygen and go to school and then go to work and conquer some video game and then eventually die. God put you here to make a difference in the world. The Apostle Paul, in a letter he writes in the first century, puts it this way. He said, we are God's masterpiece. He's created us anew in Christ Jesus. So, why did he create us new? Why did he give us new life? Why did he call us into his kingdom? So we can do the good things he planned for us long ago. We are God's masterpiece. And I know we don't feel like a masterpiece. Right? It's one of the most fascinating things about the Christian faith. And there's something so unique about the Christian faith compared to other religions and in other faiths. Right? Because in most religions, I would venture to say in every religion, it is dangerous to talk about the holy person or the leadership of that faith in a negative way. And yet when you read through the pages of Scripture, right, the different manuscripts that make up our Bible, it is almost ridiculous at how frequently the people, the men, the women that God chose to use, how their shortcomings are pointed out, how their weaknesses. There are people God used and they're liars. Others are deceivers, some sexually immoral, others selfishly ambitious. I'm pretty sure I read manuscripts that talk about how God even used Detroit Lion fans at times. It is just amazing the kind of person that God uses. And what's interesting is when you look at these men and women in different generations and living in different continents, different time periods in history, the one thing they had in common other than their screw-ups and failures and faults was not their speaking ability or their talents or the qualifications or their abundance of resources. It was the fact that they made themselves available. God uses ordinary people who make themselves available. And the reason that a few thousand children have been impacted through our ministries, and the reason that more than 1,000 people have surrendered their lives to Jesus, and more than 900 of them have been baptized, and we have more baptisms coming up at our worship night, the reason that all kinds of mission work has been fueled in our communities and in different places of the world, the reason that so many people have connected relationally, have become part of each other's lives, that people would point to others in the faith community here and say they were a catalyst in my spiritual journey. The reason why is because in every season of this church, men and women have just stepped up, they've linked arms, and they said, God, if you are up to something, I want to be a part of it. So let me just tell you, when you see what God has done, just know it's not the result of Dave Nelson. I don't say that humbly. I know I've had a role, but a whole lot of other people have. In Kenosha, with all the craziness of trying to find the place, there's people every week who show up and they park cars. And they do it faithfully. There are people who open doors and they welcome guests, and they do it week after week after the week, and they want to communicate, we want you here and we're ready for you. There's people who check in kids, and they make it easy for parents to feel like they're leaving their kids in a safe place. There's people every week who faithfully teach our children, and they're putting an anchor in their souls. There's people every week who show up and they serve our students, and they let them know their identity is so much more than how many people follow them on social media. And there's people who show up and they make and they serve coffee, and they welcome people, and they love people. There's people who serve at our Next Steps table, and they answer questions, and they try to put people at ease, and they hand out t-shirts to first-time guests, and they engage people in conversations. And there's people who volunteer and they serve and they play on our music teams, and they create settings for us to connect with God. And the list goes on and on and on and on. There's people who run tech and lighting and sound, and people who help us do what we do online, and people who clean our buildings during the week, and people who prep kids' materials, and people who lead mission events throughout the church. People are constantly serving. Even right now as I'm talking, I'm pretty sure someone's outside right now washing my car. That's the kind of environment that we have around here. And I say all this, and it's kind of a reminder to you, because I think sometimes it's easy to be like kids showing up to dinner, right? Dinner's called, you get up and you eat the meal, and if you didn't like it, you complain about it, and if you did like it, you might say thank you, and then you run off. You give no thought to what it took to prepare and get it ready, and no thought to what it's going to take to clean it up. And I get it, but I want you to know and to be reminded of, it takes an army of people to do what we do. And if you are a follower of Jesus, the church does not simply exist to serve you. If you're a follower of Jesus, come on, we are the church. And we exist for this world. And so many of us love the idea of having a church where people can come and they're welcomed with open arms just like they are. And we love having a church that focuses on children and students, and a church that serves here, near, and far. And we love having a church with music that's easy to listen to and engage with. And we love having a church that offers groups and helps people connect. And we love having a church that gives things away. And we love having a church online for people to engage. And we love having a church where marriages are restored and people find freedom from the weight of religion, and where God is revealing himself to those who are searching. And at the end of the day, I think all of us would agree we want to be a part of a great church. And so my question is, do you want to attend a great church, or do you want to help build a great church? And my challenge, whether you show up in person or you engage with us online, is if you love the idea of Great Lakes Church and the concept of it, I want you to get involved personally. If you're a follower of Jesus, you've been attending Great Lakes Church for more than 4 months, I'm just going to ask you, will you get involved? And I could give you plenty of examples of places and opportunities for you to serve. But at the end of the day, the best thing for me to do is I'm going to point you in a little bit online to a place where you can go. But the disciple Peter, he urged his readers in the first century, and he said this: each one should use whatever gift he has received to serve others. Guys, you can waste your life, you can spend it, or you can invest it. And I'm calling on you to invest it. I'm challenging you. If you're listening, if you're just watching online, you're not in person, you can go to greatlakechurch.com/serve, and you can look for online serving opportunities, and you can be a part of us even if you live 100 miles away, 300 miles away. If you're hanging out with us in person, what I'm going to ask you to do right now is grab your connection card and get ready. We're going to go over this in just a moment. We're at Steen Campus. Pastor Rex is going to go through this with you in just a moment. And before that, I'm going to pray. So our Heavenly Father, thank you for what you've done in and through us over the last 12 or 13 years. We now look to you to lead us into the future. May we be effective in reaching people for you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.